Okay, so Shantideva alludes to the wisdom chapter in a lot of the other chapters. For example, even in the patience chapter, he says, if the self were permanent, not inherently existent, but it's moving that way, right? If the self were permanent, it would obviously be devoid of activity, just like space. So even if we were to meet other conditions, what could the unchanging do? Even if, when acted upon, it remains as before, then what did activity do to it? If it is said this is the activity of that, how could the two ever be related? Hence all are governed by others, and through the power of that they have no power. Having understood in this way, I shall not become angry at all things that are like emanations. Okay, so the question becomes, how do you relate to these verses? And, if we go to the last one there, hence all are governed by others, this kind of phrasing is a reference to dependent arising, which is basically saying nothing came from nothing. Yeah, there's nothing that arose all by itself. And, we've probably all done this teaching in some form or the other, but you're really thinking, why are things empty? They're empty because they're dependent. Yeah, if they weren't dependent, they wouldn't be empty. Okay, what are they dependent on? Every single thing, including the person I'm angry at, including the event, including myself. Every single thing is dependent upon parts. Hmm. And all impermanent things are dependent on causes and conditions. And everything is dependent upon being merely labeled by the mind on a valid basis. Subtle point. Okay, but the first two are actually relatively easy, kind of just unpacking it, thinking about context. So, what are the parts of an argument? What's the actual weapon? Is it the words? Well, the words out of context, read on a page or said at a different time, wouldn't hurt you. Is it the tone? That tone delivered in a play, that tone delivered to someone else, that tone on a different day would land differently. What's the weapon? The weapon is their anger itself. But if their anger itself was directed at someone else, it wouldn't land the same, etc., etc. So you're looking at each component of the argument and asking, where was the harm given to me specifically? And, even a tiny tweak of circumstance, the whole thing would play out differently internally to you. Yeah, if you came to the event from a different place, from your side, right? Slightly more rested, slightly more grounded, slightly less traffic that day, it would land differently. And just softening the edges of the story a little bit, you can still allow the story to be there was an argument, but what it all means doesn't have that same concreteness. It gives you that wiggle room to ask, is it just as I thought? Is it just as I thought? Yeah, for example. Okay, so when you see some of these phrasings, you definitely do need commentary, and there's lots of commentaries on Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. But when you see, hence all are governed by others, it doesn't mean everyone's a slave or something like that. It means we're all dependent on countless causes and conditions. We have no inherent independent power. We have free will relatively, but every choice we've ever made and every choice everyone else ever makes is conditioned, is dependent, is a coming together of many things. So that can help settle the fuel of the anger. And then if we go to the wisdom verses, it gets very technical, but it's beautiful if you can stay with it. So verse 2 says the concealer, the conventional, and the ultimate are asserted to be the two truths. The ultimate is not an object of utilization of the mind. The mind is said to be a concealer. Okay, you read that, and on the surface, it doesn't have a lot of immediate meaning unless you study the Prasangika view. But what we're talking about is just the categories of describing phenomena, basis, path, and result. So in Buddhism, the basis is all of the content related to like Buddhist science or the physical world or just how things are. The path is what you do with that information, what you practice with, right? This is where we get religious, spiritual side of Buddhism. And then the result is what comes from that. Okay, so the basis, the two truths, conventional and ultimate, as mentioned by that verse, they're two ways of relating to phenomena. Conventional or all obscuring truth, truth to a worldly mind, or ultimate truth, the truth to a mind engaged in ultimate analysis. So we want to ask true for who? Not that there's externally different truths out there, but true for who? True from the perspective of which type of mind? An obscured one or one abiding in the absolute nature of reality? So relative truth is true for people like us. So what do you do with that? You say, all right, well, whatever problematic thing is happening, start with, yes, it does seem that way. Yes, it does seem that way. That's how you don't gaslight yourself. Yes, it does seem like that way. It does seem like they are rude. It does seem like they are harmful. It does seem like this is difficult. Yes, it does seem that way. To a mind like mine, that is an obscured or concealed truth. It's concealed or obscured by innate grasping at inherent existence, which means it appears to be truly existent. It appears or seems to exist from its own side as it is. It looks like it exists by way of its own character or its own characteristics. It seems to exist from its own side. Of course, it seems that way. Start with that. Of course, it seems that way. The truth I see is obscured truth. It's obscured by ignorance. Okay. So what you're trying to do is not talk over the top of that, but to say, despite it seeming that way, if I unpack it, I know it does not exist that way. Yeah. You think, okay, inherently, you know what, let me see. We'll use the classic example. Inherently, this is a cup. Yes, cup. Okay. That is a cup from its own side. It looks like it's a cup from its own side and that no one would be confused that it's a cup from its own side, inherently out there. But it's a concealer truth because it seems to be inherently a cup. It's a dependently arisen cup merely labeled by the mind. When you were a little kid, you didn't know it was a cup. You had to be introduced. This is a cup. You use the handle. You pour things in it. You drink your tea. That's its function. It holds liquid. Yeah, you had to be introduced. But now we're so used to it, it seems to tell us it's a cup rather than we're telling it it's a cup. Just like it seems like the bad person is telling us or showing us they are like that when we've branded them that way, the other way around. So if you can think about the concealment as a concealment you're placing on top of reality from an innate ignorance, and that you're seeing things through cobwebs, or you're seeing things through a tiny keyhole, and there's a vast landscape that you're not able to access. You're the concealer. The truth is not concealed out there. You're the one bringing concealment to it. And the simplest way to think of it is just you don't know the whole story. And thinking any situation you don't know the whole story, after a few beats of reflection, that makes sense to you, yes? At first you think, yeah, I know the story. They did this to that, and that's why this. And then you expand out and you think, oh, right, because of their family of origin and their family of origin and their family of origin and their family of origin. And you get all the way down the rabbit hole to the beginning of humanity. And, you know, evolution's fine, go with evolution, but like, can you get to the bottom of the rabbit hole of problematic behavior? Why did one person hurt another? Why does anyone hurt anyone? You know, it feels so simple on the surface. They're bad, they're selfish, they're greedy, they're mistaken, they're confused, they're suffering. All of that can be true, but it's only one part of the story, and two or three beats of considered thought, you know there is more to the story. Yeah. So you already are able to access the fact of concealment, even though you can't quite break through the concealment, you know there's a concealment there. So this example is used in a lot of different contexts, but I like it in this context, which is if you're looking at a snowy mountain with sunglasses on, it looks blue, right? The snow looks blue if you're wearing colored glasses. But you have seen snow before, you know what snow looks like, you know snow is white. And so even though it looks blue, you don't believe that it's blue, right? Or the example of the face in the mirror, right? You look in the mirror, it looks like there's a whole other face there, but you know it's just your own face reflected. If you were a cat, you would think it's another cat. Yeah, or you'd be annoyed and confused and not sure. But you know it's not a whole other face. So it looks like there's another face, but you don't believe there's another face. The snow mountain looks blue with your sunglasses on, but you know it's not blue. The person in front of you looks like a horrible person when they're behaving badly, but you know that's not the story of them. Or the person in front of you looks like they're giving you happiness when they're being kind and sweet and loving and responsive. It seems like that is what is giving you the happy feeling. And it's only one tiny part of the condition giving you the happy feeling. It's not influencing you, right? It is having an influence, but not the significance that you're attributing to it. Yes, the beautiful sunny day outside after being in Oregon through the gray, rainy winter, similar to the UK. It just rains and rains and rains and rains, and there's a sunny day. That is having an influence on my mood, but not the influence I'm attributing to it. It's only one of countless conditions. You can be grumpy on a sunny day. We've all been grumpy on a sunny day, yes. We've been happy on a rainy day. But when you're in that kind of concrete thinking, you overemphasize. So if you can make dependent arising the simple access point to the truth of emptiness, it will really help. The simple way is just to think it's a bigger picture than what I'm making it. And I already know that, I just need to remember. And as soon as I remember it's a bigger picture or a bigger story, I stop giving excessive significance to the couple of components in my view. I know my view is not able to see everything. Does that make sense? So relative truth is a concealer truth. It's a deceptive truth. It's not deceiving us from its side. We're deceiving the truth from our side because of our ignorance, which is removable, thank goodness, right? And when we've realized emptiness directly, which needs a very stable mind, right? A very stable mind and a very precise analysis coming together. When we realize emptiness directly, then we have access to ultimate truth while we're meditating. But after we get out of meditation, things still appear inherently existent. They still seem inherently existent. And it's only a Buddha that can see relative truth and ultimate truth simultaneously. So once you've realized emptiness, you are not sucked into the story of your delusions in the same way, but things still look the way they've always looked. They still seem the way they've always seemed, but the spell is broken. Yeah, the spell is broken fundamentally, so you don't get hooked by the storyline the way you used to be. Yeah, it frees things up, but you have to keep meditating on emptiness and keep meditating on emptiness again and again and again, clearing eons of negative karma and habits of this kind of projection. But for us at our level, just thinking there is more to the story can already unlock a level of agitation. So whatever shortcut gets you there, find one. When you're really certain of a story and you're really holding on to it tightly, if you can say there is more to the story, or this is merely labeled by the mind, or not in and of itself, not from its own side, what's going to release your grasp? What's going to get you out of that concreteness, but not so fundamentally that you lose ethics? And that's the subtlety of the middle way, right? Is that you think, okay, nothing exists from its own side, therefore even good and bad don't exist inherently, which means giving food to the hungry is not good. That's too far. Giving food to the hungry is good, but not from its own side, right? Because it depends on context. Good to what aim? Good to fill their bellies immediately? Yes. Good to be kind and generous? Yes. But then there's a whole other context of, are you being disempowering? Are you enabling? Are you having the pride of being a grand benefactor? Are you offering nutritious food? Context, 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 context. So you give food to the hungry and you think that is a good thing, and you remember it lacks inherent existence, then you don't over-identify, I am the hero, they are the victim. You don't over-identify and think that was a good thing all by itself, divorced from context. Then if someone says, I don't want your food, you're not mad at them. Right? Or if someone says, I was lost without your food, I would have died without it, you don't fall into that story and think that you're the savior of mankind. Do you understand, right? It's living in that razor's edge where if you've lost ethics, you've gone too far. Positive actions lead to happiness, negative actions lead to suffering, but what is positive and what is negative can only be described from a distance. When you're in amongst it in the present moment, you do the best you can with the information you have. And you don't overthink it. You stay in alignment with avoiding the 10 non-virtues and practicing the 10 virtues. Right? Just like in the ethics section of Shantideva's Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life, right? You're refrain from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, right? You refrain from lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle gossip, right? You refrain from covetousness, ill will, and wrong views, right? You refrain from negative actions of body, speech, and mind because they result in suffering for yourself and others. And context, 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 which is even built into vows themselves, right? Like, there's the vow not to lie. Okay, lying is bad. And then you take bodhisattva vows. You have to lie if it's for the greater good. Like the classic story of the meditator sitting, a deer runs by, the hunter comes up and says, which way did the deer go? And you go, oh, that way, right? It's a big fat lie for the greater good, right? So, you're not losing nuance, but you're also not sort of over justifying to the state where you can make anything anything and getting lost in a sea of hedonism. It's such a razor's edge, such a razor's edge. But if you've lost ethics, you've gone too far. So that's the way to know. Everything exists within a context, but it does exist, right? Everything merely labeled by the mind, but it is there, right? There are two selves, right? There's the self that exists relatively, and there's the self that doesn't exist at all. And right now, the self that doesn't exist at all is the one we think we are. And when we overcome that, it's not like we're gone. It's that we realize that we exist merely labeled by the mind on the valid basis, the continuum of consciousness, or the 5 aggregates, however you want to say. So if you realize emptiness, you're not going into a void and you're not blinking out of existence. But the problem is the self we think we are and the self we think other people are is usually the object of negation because we think it's the inherently existent version. Yeah. Okay, so when you understand the basis, the two truths, then you practice method and wisdom, right? The two collections or two accumulations. So the method side of the path is straightforward, kind stuff, generosity, and so forth. And the merit of transcendental wisdom, which develops the wisdom side of the path by meditation on emptiness and so forth, develops the wisdom collection. And you need those two ways of practicing. Practices that are kind, good, ethical, logical, straightforward, just do your best. And then you need the ones related to wisdom, which are really overcoming the habit of assuming separateness, of projection, of grasping at inherent existence. Yeah, so, you ask what is the content of the positive karma accumulated, which category and from what level of understanding and motivation. It just goes into one of two collections. Do your best to practice both, which results in the two bodies of a Buddha, Rupakaya and Dharmakaya. The truth body or Dharmakaya, the result of the wisdom side, and the form, body, or rupakaya, the result of the method side. Sometimes they're elaborated into 4, but it's basically what you need to benefit others and what you need to yourself not suffer. So this framework of the basis, path, and result can be really useful. And when you're reading Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life, just kind of like keep it up in awareness, this very first verse of the Perfection of Wisdom, that the Muni, Shakyamuni Buddha, taught all of these branches for the purpose of wisdom. So therefore, those who desire to pacify suffering should generate wisdom, the wisdom realizing the emptiness of inherent existence. Okay. So keep coming back to that text again and again. It's a classic, it's a beauty, and hopefully I'll see you guys again online or in person soon, but definitely get to Land of Joy if you can. It's such a beautiful place, really very special, beautiful place. And thank you guys for organizing it.
Huge thanks, Venerable Yönten. It's been a wonderful teaching. Wishing you health and a long life, and please come back to teach us.
Thank you so much. Really beautiful group, you guys. Thank you so much. We'll dedicate.
Thank you.
Janchu Sencho Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyochi, Ke Pan Yampa Me Pa Yang Gone Gondu Pelwan Sho. Great, thank you so much. Happy practicing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you.